The stagecoach wheels screamed to a halt, kicking up a cloud of red prairie dust that tasted like broken dreams. For the bachelors of Sundown Prairie, this was the most important day of the month. It was the day the mail-order brides arrived. Men who hadn't washed behind their ears in weeks now stood in pressed shirts, their boots shuffling nervously on the hard-packed earth. They scanned the women stepping down from the coach like cattlemen judging livestock. A young one with golden curls named Mary was claimed in seconds. A rosy-cheeked girl named Sarah was next, swept up by a hopeful blacksmith. One by one, they were chosen, paired off, their futures decided in a single glance. And then there was only one left. Josephine Washington. At 35, she was considered ancient in a world where girls married at 16. Her dress was worn but clean, her hands were calloused, and she stood with a quiet dignity that seemed to unnerve the townsfolk. They whispered. They pointed. They looked right through her. From the shade of the mercantile porch, a grieving widower named Sam McCready watched it all unfold. He hadn't come for a bride. He'd lost his wife, Maria, a year ago, and his heart was a boarded-up house. But his two boys, Daniel and Ben, had begged to see the stage come in. 8-year-old Daniel stood tall beside him, his eyes missing nothing. 5-year-old Ben clung to his brother's hand, silent as a shadow. The boy hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since his mother died. The crowd began to thin. The happy new couples headed for the preacher's house. Josephine was left alone in the brutal sun, a solitary statue of disappointment. The general store owner flipped his sign to closed. The station master wouldn't meet her eye. It was a cruel, silent verdict. She was unwanted. But Josephine didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply opened a small satchel, pulled out a book, and began to read. This simple act was a spark in the tinder dry town. A woman who could read, and read with such calm focus in the face of public humiliation, it was unheard of. Sam felt a stir of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. She had the same steel in her spine his Maria once had. Then his son, Daniel, broke away from his side. The boy marched directly across the dusty square, his little boots kicking up puffs of dirt. He walked right up to the woman everyone else had rejected. He stopped, looked up into her face, and the entire town held its breath. The boy pointed a small, determined finger. And in a voice that cut through the afternoon haze, clear as a church bell, he said the two words that would ignite a firestorm. "That's Mama." The silence that followed was heavier than a winter snow. Every head turned, every mouth fell open. Mrs. Henderson, the town's self-appointed moral compass, looked like she'd just swallowed a hornet. Sam felt the ground drop out from under him. His son's words weren't a question, they were a declaration. A truth delivered with the brutal honesty only a child possesses. Daniel, unaware of the social earthquake he just caused, simply smiled. Then something even more impossible happened. Little Ben, the silent boy who flinched from his own shadow, let go of his father's leg. He walked slowly, hesitantly, toward Josephine. He reached out a tiny hand and placed it in hers. He looked up at her, and a whisper, the first word he'd spoken in public in months, escaped his lips. "Mama Joe." The nickname, spoken with such reverence, hung in the air. The crowd was a sea of shocked faces. They weren't just witnessing a strange boy's outburst, they were witnessing a miracle. Ben, the boy who had retreated into a world of silence, had just spoken to a complete stranger, and not just spoken, but claimed her. Sam's mind was reeling. His sons, his broken, grieving sons, had just chosen this woman. They had bypassed every social rule, every prejudice, and followed an instinct so pure and powerful it defied all logic. He started forward, ready to apologize, to smooth things over, but he stopped when he saw Josephine. She hadn't recoiled. She hadn't looked embarrassed. She had knelt down to their level, her expression one of profound gentleness. She met Sam's eyes over the heads of his children. There was no desperation in her gaze, only a quiet intelligence, a strength that seemed to radiate from her. It was in that moment Sam knew he was facing a decision that would alter the course of their lives. Mrs. Henderson's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the quiet. "Well, I never. What is this town coming to?" Her words were a challenge, a line drawn in the dust. The whole town was watching, waiting to see what Sam McCready would do. He looked at his boys, truly looked at them for the first time in months. Daniel was beaming, his face alight with a joy Sam thought had been buried with Maria. Ben was holding Josephine's hand, his little face tilted up towards hers, a look of pure adoration in his eyes. He was smiling, a real, genuine smile. In that instant, the whispers of the town, the judgment of his neighbors, it all faded into nothing. All that mattered were the two small boys who had found a glimmer of hope in the most unexpected person. He strode forward, his decision made. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "My name is Sam McCready. It appears my sons have made a choice." He offered her a deal, right there in front of God and everyone. A 1-month trial. Come to his ranch as a housekeeper. See how it works out. It wasn't charity, it was a lifeline. For her and for him. Josephine looked from Sam to the boys, and a slow, graceful nod was her answer. She stood, never letting go of Ben's hand, and faced the gawking crowd with a composure that was nothing short of regal. The journey to the McCready Ranch was a 10-mile stretch of silence and scrutiny. Sam drove the wagon, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and second-guessing. What had he just done? He'd invited a complete stranger, a woman rejected by the entire town, into his home, into the lives of his vulnerable sons. Beside him, Josephine sat ramrod straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She wasn't looking at the scenery, she was studying it. Her eyes tracked the fence lines, the dry creek beds, the quality of the soil. She saw things he'd stopped noticing years ago. The natural windbreaks, the patches of rich earth, the way the land sloped towards the hidden stream. She was reading the land like a page from one of her precious books. Daniel chattered nonstop, a torrent of questions and observations that Josephine answered with patience and thought. But the real shock was Ben. The silent boy sat pressed against Josephine's side, not clinging in fear, but leaning in comfort. He pointed out a hawk circling overhead, his small voice a thread of sound Sam had longed to hear. He was coming back to life, right before his father's eyes. As they crested the last hill, the ranch came into view. Sam felt a hot flush of shame. The main house sagged, paint peeling like sunburnt skin. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging a mournful rhythm in the breeze. The garden Maria had so lovingly tended was choked with weeds. It was a place of survival, not a home. He braced himself for Josephine's judgment, for the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. But he saw none. She looked at the dilapidated house, the neglected outbuildings, and her expression was one of calm assessment. She didn't see ruin, she saw potential. The inside was worse, a monument to masculine incompetence. Dishes were piled high, a fine layer of dust coated every surface, and the air was stale with sorrow. It was the home of a man stretched past his breaking point. Without a word of complaint, Josephine tied on an apron she pulled from her satchel and got to work. She moved with an efficiency that was mesmerizing. Windows were thrown open, letting in shafts of dusty sunlight. She found a broom and swept away the cobwebs of grief that clung to the corners of the house. She wasn't just cleaning, she was performing an exorcism. While she worked, the boys orbited her like small planets. Daniel showed her his prized collection of rocks. Ben, in a gesture that made Sam's heart ache, shyly offered her the small wooden horse his father had carved for him, his most treasured possession. That evening, for the first time in a year, the house smelled of baking bread and roasting chicken. They sat at the kitchen table, a scrubbed and orderly island in the sea of their former chaos. The food was simple, but to the boys it was a feast. They ate with an enthusiasm that had been missing for months. After dinner, Josephine established a bedtime routine. She didn't command, she guided. She read them a story from one of her books, her voice a low, musical murmur that filled the quiet house. Ben snuggled against her, asked a question, then another. Sam listened from the doorway, stunned. His son was weaving sentences together, his voice growing stronger with each one. A dam of silence had broken inside him. Later, after the boys were tucked in, a strange quiet settled between Sam and Josephine. He thanked her. the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. She simply nodded, her gaze thoughtful. She began to ask him questions about the ranch, about his plans, about his finances. Her questions were sharp, insightful. She wasn't just making small talk. She was gathering intelligence. She asked about the old trunk in the corner of the main room, the one that had belonged to his father. He'd never bothered to look through it, assuming it was just old junk. Her curiosity was piqued. That night, long after Sam and the boys were asleep, Josephine tiptoed out of her small room. By the light of a single candle, she lifted the heavy lid of the old trunk. It wasn't filled with junk. It was filled with papers, old brittle documents tied with faded ribbon, land grants, water rights certificates, mineral surveys. She unrolled a large hand-drawn map of the property. Her eyes widened. The official boundaries of the McCready Ranch extended far, far beyond the fences Sam maintained. They included the very stream his neighbors were fighting over. She dug deeper. Her breath caught in her throat. Tucked at the very bottom was a legal document, a trust established by Sam's father. It stipulated that the full wealth of the land, the water, the minerals, everything, was to be held in trust for his grandchildren. But there was a clause written in dense legal script that would have been meaningless to most. The trust could be broken and control of the assets handed to an outside executor if the children's guardian was ever deemed unfit. It wasn't just a will, it was a weapon. Sam thought he was a struggling rancher on a worthless piece of land. The truth was, he was the unknowing guardian of a massive fortune, a fortune protected by a legal time bomb. And Josephine was the only one who knew it. She sat back on her heels, the candlelight flickering across her face. This changed everything. The town's disapproval, Mrs. Henderson's sneers. It was all background noise now. A much more dangerous game was afoot, and she had just stumbled onto the board. She carefully put the documents back, her mind racing. Revealing this secret could save them, or it could paint a giant target on their backs. For now, she would wait. She would watch, and she would prepare. The woman everyone had dismissed as a worthless old maid was now the secret keeper of a dynasty and the protector of the two small boys who had, against all odds, called her Mama. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of quiet transformation. Under Josephine's hand, the McCready Ranch began to heal. The house shed its dusty skin, becoming a place of warmth and order. The garden was cleared of weeds, and tiny green shoots began to push through the rich soil. The rhythm of their lives found a new, steadier beat. Meals were on time, clothes were mended, but the real changes were in the boys. Daniel's curiosity, once a wild thing, was now channeled. Josephine taught him to read not just from her books, but from the legal documents she kept hidden. She'd point to a complex word like jurisdiction or endowment, and he'd sound it out, oblivious to the fact that he was deciphering the secrets of his own inheritance. Ben blossomed. The little boy who once communicated in nods and whispers was now a chatterbox. He followed Josephine everywhere, his small voice a constant stream of questions and stories. The nightmares that had plagued him since his mother's death began to fade, replaced by a deep, peaceful sleep. He was secure. He was loved. Sam watched it all with a sense of awe. He found himself looking forward to the evenings after the boys were in bed, when he and Josephine would sit on the porch. They talked about everything, from crop rotation to the stars that blanketed the prairie sky. He had never met a mind like hers. She was sharp, strategic, yet possessed a deep well of compassion. He was starting to feel things he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Maria, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the remarkable woman sitting beside him. The town's attitude began to shift from outright hostility to grudging curiosity. People saw the McCready boys in town, clean, well-fed, and happy. They saw Sam, the haunted widower, with a lighter step and a smile on his face. The narrative began to change. Maybe this strange arrangement wasn't so scandalous after all. Only Mrs. Henderson remained a bastion of disapproval. She watched from a distance, her lips pursed in a permanent sneer. Her disapproval felt personal, more pointed than simple prejudice. It was as if the McCready family's newfound happiness was a direct insult to her. On the last day of the 1-month trial, Josephine knew it was time. She waited until the boys were asleep, then laid the documents out on the kitchen table. One by one, she explained their meaning to Sam. The land grants, the mineral rights, the water rights that could make them the wealthiest family in the territory. Sam stared, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been struggling to keep from losing this land, while all along he had been sitting on a king's ransom. My father. He never said a word, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But Josephine wasn't finished. She showed him the trust. She explained the clause, the terrible legal loophole that tied the family's fortune to his fitness as a father. She saw the understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by a cold dread. This wasn't just a gift from his father. It was a burden, a vulnerability. Any accusation, any challenge to his character could cost his sons everything. Why did you wait to tell me? He asked, his gaze searching hers. I had to be sure, she said simply. Sure of what? That you were a man worthy of this fight. A new partnership was forged that night, one built on shared secrets and a common purpose. The next day, their trial month was over. There was no question of her leaving. She was part of the family now. They began to make plans. Cautious letters were drafted to neighboring ranchers, offering to lease access to their water for a fair price. The first offer came back within days, a sum so large it made Sam's head spin. Their money troubles were over, just like that. A wave of relief washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. They had done it. They were safe. But safety is a fragile thing on the frontier. The following Tuesday, a lone rider galloped up to the ranch, his horse lathered in sweat. He carried a single yellow piece of paper, a telegram. The message was short, the words like ice chips. It was from Philadelphia. Maria's sister, a woman named Victoria Ashworth, a woman Sam had never met, was coming. The telegram ended with 5 chilling words. I am coming for my nephews. The paper fluttered from Sam's numb fingers. The time bomb his father had buried in that trunk had just been lit. Their secret fortune had a claimant, and she was coming to tear their new world apart. The air in the small kitchen crackled with tension. Victoria Ashworth. The name itself sounded rich and powerful. A woman from Philadelphia society, armed with lawyers and Eastern money, against a dirt-poor rancher and his controversial housekeeper. In a courtroom, they wouldn't stand a chance. Sam paced the floor, a caged animal. She'll paint me as an unfit father, he said, his voice ragged. Living out here in the dirt with... He trailed off, unable to voice the town's prejudice. With a black woman who isn't my wife, Josephine finished for him, her voice calm and steady. She knew exactly how Victoria's lawyers would spin it. A tale of a grieving, incompetent father and 2 neglected boys living in squalor and moral depravity. The trust, the one meant to protect the boys, would be the very weapon used to disinherit them. All their newfound hope, the laughter that had started to fill the house, it was all about to be extinguished. The boys sensed the shift immediately. The easy atmosphere in the house evaporated, replaced by hushed, urgent conversations. Ben grew quiet again, his small face etched with worry. Daniel's bravado faltered, his eyes darting between the 2 adults he trusted most in the world. They were scared, and that terrified Sam more than anything. He saw only one option: to run, to pack up the boys and disappear into the territories before Victoria could find them. But Josephine saw another way. Her mind, honed by years of quiet observation and secret study, was already working, calculating angles, seeing moves on a chessboard Sam didn't even know existed. She stopped his pacing, her hand on his arm. Running is what she wants, Sam. It will only prove her right. Then what do? He pleaded. We fight, but not on her terms, on ours. She took a deep breath, her gaze direct and unwavering. There is one thing we can do that will give us a legal standing she cannot easily challenge. One thing that will bind us together, not just as a household, but as a family in the eyes of the law. The proposal hung in the air between them, shocking in its simplicity and staggering in its implications. We get married. Sam stared at her, speechless. Marriage. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a declaration of war. a strategic move to protect his sons. As Sam's legal wife, Josephine would have parental rights. Their combined assets, her sharp mind and his name, would form a united front. Their household, once a scandal, would become a legally recognized family. It was audacious. It was desperate. And it was their only shot. He looked at this incredible woman who had walked into their broken lives and rebuilt them from the ashes. He respected her more than anyone he knew. He was starting to care for her in ways that both thrilled and frightened him. But this was bigger than his feelings. This was about his sons. Yes, he said, the word coming out as a choked whisper. Yes. They didn't have much time. Victoria's train was already speeding west. They rode into town the next day and found the circuit preacher. The wedding was a hasty affair, held right there in the main room of the ranch house. Daniel stood as his father's best man, his face a mixture of confusion and solemn pride. Ben, clutching a handful of wildflowers, acted as the witness. A few neighbors came, their expressions ranging from supportive to scandalized. Mrs. Henderson stood in the back, her arms crossed, radiating pure venom. When the preacher asked for the ring, Sam hesitated. Then he pulled a small, simple gold band from his pocket. It was Maria's. He looked at Josephine, his eyes asking a silent question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The boys had insisted. Their mother, they said, would want Mama Joe to have it. The ring wasn't a replacement. It was a continuation, a circle of love protecting their family. They spoke their vows, not of passion, but of partnership, pledges to protect and defend their children, to build a life together, to stand as one against the storm that was coming. As the preacher pronounced them man and wife, a strange sense of peace settled over Sam. It felt right. It felt true. But their quiet celebration was short-lived. Just as they were sharing a slice of the cake one of the neighbors had brought, they heard it, a long, mournful whistle echoing through the valley. The train had arrived. Victoria Ashworth was here. The world outside their small ranch house held its breath, but inside a new family stood ready for the fight of their lives. Victoria Ashworth did not just arrive in Sundown Prairie. She descended upon it. Her private rail car, all polished mahogany and gleaming brass, made the town's humble station look like a child's toy. Uniformed servants unloaded trunks of elegant luggage, each one a testament to a world of unimaginable wealth. And then Victoria herself appeared, stepping onto the dusty platform as if it were a royal court. She was tall and slender, dressed in a traveling suit of deep blue silk that rustled with authority. Her face was beautiful, but it was a cold, chiseled beauty, like a statue in a museum. She moved with an unnerving purpose, her sharp eyes taking in the town's poverty and finding it lacking. Within hours, she had taken over the town's only hotel, her lawyers transforming the lobby into a makeshift command center. They were slick, fast-talking men from the East who treated the local townsfolk with thinly veiled contempt. They began their assault immediately, not with threats, but with whispers. They interviewed neighbors, offering sympathy and concern for the poor, motherless McCready boys. They painted a picture of Sam as a broken man, incapable of caring for his children, who had fallen under the spell of an opportunistic and most scandalously colored woman. They fanned the flames of the town's prejudice until it was a raging fire. Mrs. Henderson became their greatest ally. She held court on the mercantile porch, spinning tales of neglect and impropriety, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. But Josephine noticed something odd. Victoria's lead lawyer, a man named Sterling, met several times with Mrs. Henderson's brother, a failed rancher named Jed, who had always been jealous of the McCready land, even when he thought it was worthless. They met in secret, behind the livery stable, exchanging hushed words in sealed envelopes. It wasn't just a custody battle. Josephine was sure of it. This was a conspiracy. The first official move came a week later, a summons delivered by the town sheriff, ordering Sam and Josephine to a custody hearing at the territorial courthouse. Victoria was formally petitioning for guardianship of her nephews, citing parental neglect and an immoral home environment. Sam's heart sank, but Josephine's eyes hardened with resolve. The fight was here. They spent the next few days preparing. While Sam tended to the ranch, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for the boys, Josephine locked herself away with the trunk of documents. She worked tirelessly by candlelight, her legal mind piecing together the puzzle. She wasn't just looking for a defense. She was looking for a weapon. She cross-referenced the trust documents with the county land registry. She found records of other land deals Sterling, Victoria's lawyer, had been involved in. A pattern began to emerge. A dark and predatory pattern. Sterling specialized in finding wealthy Eastern families with distant relatives who had inherited valuable, undeveloped land in the West. He would then manufacture a crisis, a custody battle, a competency hearing, to gain control of the assets through a legal trust, just like the one Sam's father had created. The unsuspecting Eastern relatives were pawns in his game, their genuine family concerns weaponized for his own greed. He wasn't working for Victoria, he was using her. And Jed, Mrs. Henderson's brother, was his local accomplice, promised a piece of the McCready fortune once Sterling had control. Mrs. Henderson's outrage wasn't about morality, it was about greed. The night before the hearing, Josephine knew she had to take a massive gamble. She couldn't win by simply defending their family. She had to expose the conspiracy. And to do that, she needed to turn their chief adversary into their greatest ally. She needed to get to Victoria. Leaving Sam with the sleeping boys, she rode into town under the cover of darkness. She slipped past the guards Sterling had posted outside the hotel and made her way to Victoria's suite. She was intercepted by a servant, but her quiet dignity and the sheer force of her will got her through the door. Victoria was sitting by the window, a lonely figure in a room filled with opulent furniture that looked out of place in the dusty town. She looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and anger. "How dare you?" she began, but Josephine cut her off. "I am not here to fight with you, Mrs. Ashworth," Josephine said, her voice low and urgent. "I am here to warn you. You are being used." For the next hour, Josephine laid it all out. She didn't plead or make emotional appeals. She presented facts. She showed Victoria copies of the trust, explained the legal loopholes, and detailed the other cases she had uncovered involving Sterling. She painted a picture not of a concerned aunt, but of a grieving woman being manipulated by a predator who was using her to steal her nephew's inheritance. Victoria listened, her cold facade slowly cracking. The woman in front of her wasn't the uneducated opportunist her lawyer had described. This was a brilliant, articulate woman fighting for her family. Doubt began to creep into Victoria's eyes. Josephine played her final card. "Your lawyer is meeting with Jedediah Thorne, Mrs. Henderson's brother, tonight, at the old mission ruins. They believe they have already won. Go and see for yourself. Hear what they say when they think no one is listening." Victoria stared at Josephine, a war raging within her. Could it be true? Could her righteous quest to save her sister's children be nothing more than a cover for a land grab? With a curt nod, she made her decision. The two women, who should have been bitter enemies, slipped out of the hotel and into the night, united by a single desperate purpose: to uncover the truth. The old mission ruins stood skeletal against the moonlit sky. Hiding in the shadows of a crumbling adobe wall, Victoria and Josephine watched as two figures approached. It was Sterling, Victoria's lawyer, and Jed Thorne. Their voices carried on the still night air, arrogant and self-congratulatory. "It's in the bag," Sterling said with a chuckle. "The judge is practically on our payroll. Once we have the guardianship, the trust transfers to my control. The old fool McCready will be thrown off the land, and it's all ours." Jed rubbed his hands together. "And the woman? The darky? She'll be run out of the territory. The Aunt Victoria? She'll be a hero back in Philadelphia for saving the boys. She'll never know she was just the key we used to unlock the vault." A gasp escaped Victoria's lips. It was true. All of it. Her grief, her love for her sister, her concern for her nephews. It had all been twisted and used against her by this vile man. A cold, hard fury, unlike anything she had ever felt, rose up inside her. Her personal tragedy had been turned into a business transaction. At that moment, she was no longer a sophisticated lady from the East. She was a woman betrayed, and she wanted vengeance. She stepped out from the shadows, her face a pale mask of rage in the moonlight. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you're fired." The two men froze, their faces a comical picture of shock. Before they could react, the sheriff, whom Josephine had quietly summoned before they left, stepped out from the other side of the ruins. The conspiracy was blown wide open. But this was only the beginning. The real battle, the one for their family and their future, would be fought in the courtroom the next day. And now they had a powerful new ally on their side. The courtroom was packed. The entire town of Sundown Prairie had turned out for the spectacle. It was a sweltering day, and the air was thick with anticipation. Mrs. Henderson and her brother Jed sat in the front row, looking pale and nervous. Sterling, representing himself now, looked smug, believing he could still talk his way out of this. On the other side of the aisle sat Sam, Josephine, and to the town's collective gasp, Victoria Ashworth. She was dressed not in fine silk, but in a simple, severe black dress, a silent statement of solidarity. The hearing began with the judge, a man whose impartiality was now in serious question. Looking distinctly uncomfortable, Sterling launched into his argument, painting a lurid picture of life on the McCready Ranch. He spoke of neglect, of an unsuitable environment, of a father lost in grief. He was a master manipulator, his words weaving a compelling narrative of concern. When it was their turn, Sam stood to speak, but Josephine gently touched his arm and rose instead. "With the court's permission," she said, her voice ringing with quiet confidence, "I will be acting as counsel for my husband." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A woman acting as a lawyer? A black woman? It was unprecedented. But Josephine didn't wait for an objection. She began not with a defense, but with an attack. She presented her evidence with surgical precision. The land deeds, the mineral surveys, the meticulously documented trust. She explained its terms in language so clear and simple that everyone in the room understood. This wasn't about the welfare of two boys. It was about the control of a fortune. Then she called her first witness, Victoria Ashworth. Victoria took the stand, her composure absolute. She told the court how Sterling had preyed on her grief, how he had manipulated her into believing her nephews were in danger. Her testimony was devastating, a pillar of the conspiracy crumbling under the weight of her words. Next, Josephine called the sheriff, who testified about the conversation he had overheard at the mission ruins. The whispers in the courtroom grew to a roar. The judge banged his gavel, his face turning a blotchy red. He was implicated in this, and he knew it. Finally, Josephine turned her attention to Jed and Mrs. Henderson. She unraveled their motives with a series of questions so sharp they were like a surgeon's scalpel. She exposed their jealousy, their greed, their willingness to destroy a family for a piece of land they thought they were entitled to. By the time she was done, Mrs. Henderson was in tears and Jed was refusing to answer. Sterling, in a desperate last stand, tried to dismiss it all, calling Josephine's presentation the work of a conniving, uneducated woman. "And what qualifications do you have to interpret these complex legal matters?" he sneered. "Where did a woman like you learn the law?" Josephine looked directly at the judge, then at the jury of townspeople. "I learned it in the same place I learned everything else of value in my life," she said, her voice resonating with the force of truth. "By listening, by watching, and by reading. Something I'd wager many in this room were never taught to do. My education was not bought at a fancy Eastern university, Mr. Sterling. It was earned, in the quiet hours of the night, with a borrowed book and a flickering candle, because I knew that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from me." Her speech hung in the air, a stunning indictment of their prejudice. The game was over. The judge, seeing the tide had turned and desperate to save his own skin, ruled swiftly. He dismissed Victoria's custody petition with prejudice. He declared Sam and Josephine to be the legal and rightful guardians of the children. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, he issued warrants for the immediate arrest of Sterling, Jed Thorne, and Mrs. Henderson on charges of fraud and conspiracy. Justice had been served. As Sam, Josephine, Victoria, and the boys walked out of the courthouse, they were met not with jeers and suspicion, but with a strange, respectful silence from the townspeople. They had underestimated Josephine Washington. They had dismissed her, judged her, and tried to break her. And she had responded by saving not only her family, but the very soul of their town from the corruption that had taken root within it. The sun felt warmer on their faces as they climbed into the wagon for the ride home. They were no longer just a collection of broken people clinging to each other for survival. They were a family forged in fire and stronger than steel. 6 months later, the McCready Ranch was unrecognizable. The water rights income had been poured back into the land, transforming it into a thriving, prosperous enterprise. New barns stood proud against the skyline. Fences stretched for miles in neat, orderly lines, and the house itself, now painted a cheerful white with blue shutters, was a beacon of warmth and stability. The wealth hadn't made them ostentatious, it had made them secure. The home was filled not just with new furniture, but with a new sound, constant, joyous laughter. Daniel, now 9, was devouring every book Victoria sent from Philadelphia. His mind, under Josephine's tutelage, was sharp and inquisitive. He was no longer just a boy who had made a bold declaration. He was a young man who understood the weight of family and the importance of looking past the surface to see a person's true worth. Ben's transformation was the most profound. The quiet, fearful little boy was gone forever. In his place was a bright, talkative 6-year-old who trailed his father around the ranch, his head full of dreams of being a rancher himself one day. The silence that had once defined him was now just a distant memory. Victoria became a regular fixture in their lives. She visited every month, her private rail car no longer a symbol of intimidation, but a welcome sight. She bridged the gap between their two worlds, bringing them culture and education from the East. While in turn, the simple, honest life on the ranch seemed to heal the parts of her that had been broken by grief and betrayal. She and Josephine forged a deep and unlikely friendship. Two powerful women bound by their love for the boys. The conspiracy trial had sent shockwaves through the territory. Sterling was sent to prison, his predatory scheme exposed. His downfall led to the re-examination of several other cases, and other families, cheated out of their land, finally found justice. All thanks to the woman who had first uncovered the rot. Sam and Josephine's marriage, born of necessity, had blossomed into a deep and abiding love. The respect they had for each other had grown into a partnership that was the envy of the county. In the quiet moments on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, they would hold hands, a silent acknowledgement of the incredible journey they had taken together. One crisp autumn morning, the familiar sound of the stagecoach echoed through the town. Josephine was on the mercantile porch with the boys, picking up supplies. As the coach stopped, a new group of mail-order brides stepped out. The scene was achingly familiar. Young women, nervous and hopeful, being chosen one by one. And just like before, one woman was left behind. She was older, her face etched with worry, her dress plain and worn. The whispers started, the same cruel judgments Josephine remembered so well. Daniel looked from the woman to his mother, a spark of indignation in his eyes. He knew this story. He had lived it. Before Josephine could even say a word, he tugged on her sleeve. "We have to help her, Mama." Josephine smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Together, the family, Sam, Josephine, Daniel, and Ben, walked across the square. They didn't see an unwanted spinster. They saw a woman of hidden strengths and untapped potential. Josephine approached her, not with pity, but with an offer of respect and opportunity. She introduced herself and learned the woman was a skilled teacher, cast out from her previous position back east due to circumstances beyond her control. Within an hour, Josephine had arranged a position for her as the new teacher for Sundown Prairie's one-room schoolhouse, a role the town desperately needed to fill. It was a small act, but it was a symbol of how much had changed. The town that had once rejected Josephine now looked to her as a leader, a source of wisdom and justice. She had not only built a family, but had also begun to rebuild a community, teaching it to look beyond prejudice and see the value in every single person. Years later, travelers passing through Sundown Prairie would hear the story of the McCready family. They would hear of the little boy who chose his mother in a dusty town square, and the incredible woman who saw a fortune where others saw only dirt. Daniel, who grew into a wise and respected man, would always end the story the same way. "My mother taught us," he would say, That family isn't about the blood you share, it's about the people you fight for, the people you choose, and the love you build together, piece by piece. If this story about the power of family and finding justice in the most unexpected places moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories that will make you believe in the impossible.